So good evening, everyone. And I'm MD and CEO for the wealth management business at Motilal Oswal. It's really a pleasure to welcome all of you to another series of the Vantage Point Masterclass. This is a series where we talk to industry leaders, experts, truly people who are masters in their own fields and try to get actionable insights. Today, the guest I have with me actually needs little introduction, but let me attempt to do it nonetheless. He's been named as the ranked 78 amongst the 100 most influential people in the world on Time magazine in 2009. He's also been listed amongst the 25 top Asia's most powerful people by the Fortune magazine. He's an entrepreneur, he's an investor, he's a philanthropist, and he's an opinion maker. He sold one of his first ventures at a unicorn valuation. I mean, at that time, the word unicorn was not present in our dictionaries. It's been coined much later. And he's recently written a book called Skill It, Kill It. Of course, I'm going to take this opportunity. One doesn't get someone like him too often. So I'm going to use this opportunity to talk about entrepreneurship, to talk about his journey. What are the opportunities he's seeing from his vantage point? Because he also is now leading his own family office, which is invested in multiple startups. So without further ado, I welcome Mr. Ronnie Screwvala.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here.
Right.
Hopefully we'll make this a nice interactive session.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Ronnie, first up, let me start with your entrepreneurial journey. I mean, you had, you looked at many businesses at the beginning of your entrepreneurship journey. I believe you got into toothbrush manufacturing, and then you got into cable TV, and then, of course, UTV. What I wanted to ask is, I'm just connecting this to one of the important messages that you've given in your book, which is that you don't have to be big to dream big, right? And now today, there is still a lot of capital which meets ideas. But those days, I know we were, as a country, capital starved. Entrepreneurship was probably a taboo. So what went into your mind, and what was the decision? What was the catalyst?
But anyway, good evening, everyone. So I think entrepreneurship was definitely taboo at that time, and we can talk a little bit about history, but things change so often, and they've changed over the last 2 or 3 decades. I feel like a first generation entrepreneur right now, right here myself also, because the simple reason that I've rolled up my sleeves, started all over again in many aspects. I think at that time, the challenge was it wasn't that aspirational. I think what has changed in the last 4 or 5 years or 6 years is the media has given a lot of countenance to the fact that entrepreneurship has almost become synonymous with fundraising, unfortunately, than entrepreneurship. So I have a few regrets on that, because I think the clock is turned on the complete other side. It had a good takeoff when the Prime Minister launched Startup India, and I know that in a lot of small towns and whatever else where younger generation people wanted to start up, one of the biggest resistance is always parental acceptance, family acceptance. Then I think it's the risk of it. Sometimes even if you have the risk of it, but if you feel you've got an environmental support, halfway down of you sitting on the fence moves out. So I think for me in those early days, it really gives you an incredible amount of foundation, because today I have a little bit of disdain for people who say, yeah, I've got a great idea. And I'm saying, so what's stopping you? I'm looking to raise some funds. And I'm saying, since when does that stop anyone from starting a business or being an entrepreneur? Because that's pretty much what one did at that particular point in time. So I think today, if you take out some of the entitlement feelings that you have there and the benchmarks that we put there, I think the environment has changed. It's a lot more supportive. It is difficult to do business in India, but I don't mean that in a contradictory manner. I mean, at that time, it might have been 150 times difficult to do it. Now it's about 30 times difficult to do it, but it's complicated. But for everyone who thinks and grumbles about that, my only point would be, it's also a nascent market. let's go to a place where it'll be very easy to do business. And let me tell you, it'll be a very competitive market. And today, for most entrepreneurs, I would say solving problems to make it a little bit easier, I would say is 10 times more easier than solving with a highly competitive market. And I don't think we know exactly what that means, which is the other part of the training, that we all kind of take and we think of the cup that's half empty and says, no, tough place to do business, the market doesn't grow. Yeah, but if you had the other way around, you could be pulverized in competition and your longevity of your business might even be shorter. So I think this has just been my parallel learnings between the first time as a first generation entrepreneur I did that and now. And maybe the last comment I'd make, because you started with this think of you don't need to be big to think big. I mean, I came from a lower middle class background. My dad's was a professional his whole life. My brother went out and did a PhD in HR. So I wouldn't say at that time I was the black sheep of the family, but I was definitely somebody which was contrarian. But I would think my trigger at that time would have been that I just felt I'm not a good person to implement somebody else's vision. And I think that was the penny dropping moment for me, that I felt that if I'm not, then I feel I need to build something of my own. And I have to say that came first. For a lot of people, they feel I've got a great idea, so let me leave my job or let me start there, or depending on what crossroad I am. But I think for me, it was much more this than I have a great idea. Actually, I didn't have a great idea for a long time to come after that. And I think many of the businesses that I got into, whether it was cable TV or manufacturing or later media and entertainment, were quite serendipitous.
So that's interesting. Is there a process by which one can conceptualize or think of the idea, the next big idea to start a business? Because I see so many entrepreneurs going through that phase of trying to think about what kind of business they want to get into. Is it all about what you're good at, what you're passionate about? Is it serendipity, like you said? Reason I'm asking you this, Ronnie, is over the years, you've invested in many startups and you've started many ventures and not necessarily related. I mean, you went from media to sports to education. So what is the process that you follow when you're looking at starting the next business or investing?
Yeah, I mean, I think passion and all that is a little overrated. It's important and it's nice, but I think it's a little bit overrated at that extent. Domain expertise is not that easy to start with, So I think for a lot of people, it is, if it's been a pain point for you when you start, and then that also gets glamorized because everyone says, oh, somebody started Uber because he had a problem getting a cab. That's storytelling in many ways, right? I mean, there's a little bit of fantasy to that. I mean, obviously, he must have done that 600 times and found a difficult time to get a cab on a rainy day in San Francisco. But one fine day, for different reasons, the business, but it just seems so glamorous that you got into a cab and said, from tomorrow, I'm going to start something that can actually revolutionize that. It doesn't happen that way because between that and actually implementing it is a lot. So I think there's a gravitas to validating your thought, validating your idea, validating it if the trigger has been a personal pain point or a personal cross-section, or if somebody's come to you with a great idea, or you got inspired because you traveled, you saw something and say, this I can do in my own country kind of situation. And you come back, not knowing because what the challenges would be. So I would say the grass always appears to be greener on the other side. My experience is it never is. And therefore, you've got to make what you need to do from there. So I think taking into account, the last thing I would say to this is watch out for herd mentality, really, because herd mentality, I think we all know, the best view you have when you have a herd mentality is the backside of the person in front of you, right? And that's not good. But normally a lot of people I've seen saying, no, this one did this one got funded. Oh, look at this is the hot sector. And sometimes when I'm having conversations saying, what's the hot sectors? And I'm saying, how is that relevant? Because, what are you hot on? What are you hot about? You're not suddenly going to become an entrepreneur because you found a hot sector to go in. So I think that narrow-minded focus has got to be very important.
A couple of other things, Ronnie. One is you exited your business in 2012, right? Now, how should an entrepreneur think about exit? Because a lot of times, many entrepreneurs want to run their business for as long as they can. I find a lot of entrepreneurs now beginning to exit businesses. So at what stage should an entrepreneur think about exiting, or how did you think about an exit?
I think my sense is if you start thinking about an exit, that's the first level by which you're compromising value creation in the first place. So I have to say, for me, it was a question where I had a very strong partner in the Walt Disney Company. They were sitting on our board, we would have discussions, and one fine day they popped the question. When they popped the question, I was open-minded enough to not refute it, saying, no, how can that do? This is something that I was doing my whole life. My whole identity will come to a crisis. It's my baby, whatever else. I think I also realized at that time that there's a huge difference being passionate about your business, but being emotional about your business. And I think the two sentiments become quite intertwined in one. I think I was very passionate about what I had built, but I wasn't emotional about it. So to me, if I felt the 3,000 people that were working for us would now have a much more prestigious car, if I was to hand over the business, it would be to a brand that is 100 times bigger than what I've built, so they take good care of it. Do I therefore feel it's an interesting crossroad for me personally? And I think part of my motivation was, I owned about 25, 27% of the company. And I felt as we grow, I might raise more capital and I might get diluted. And there's a level at which you feel, who are you really working for then? And I think all of that got stirred up because of that. If I had thought of exiting, I think the value proposition would have been very different, because then you're already on the defensive. You're finding a banker to find a business that's going out. The value is half right there. The very fact that you are going to let it happen is quite different. So I don't think, unless, and there's plans that everyone makes this, and I'm starting this business because I'm going to exit in 4 years. I think that's doomed. Most of the time it's doomed for failure, because you can't time an exit. The problem with an exit also for a lot of people, when they have that constant thing that I'm exiting, is that you constantly start believing in building a business you think somebody will be attracted to. So then it's not your vision, and it's a vision of some hypothetical person. And that can be extremely dangerous in creating value.
Right. Interesting. Ronnie, a lot of our clients are medium and small size business entrepreneurs, right? And Motilal Oswal itself is a first generation entrepreneurship company. I've often seen that 0 to 100 is something that many entrepreneurs make it. So typical evolution of a firm is it could start with a partnership, and then gradually you have to scale up to becoming an organization where you put processes in place. Often I've seen many firms fail to make that changeover from being a small firm to becoming an organization. And you've seen many scale ups. So what is, how does an entrepreneur look at this phase of scale up from being a small firm where you're working with a few people to,
I think if you're looking at, 0 to 10 and then 10 to 100, I think somewhere in that phrase, when you're in that 4 or 5 of that 0 to 10, if you have not started building your own organization and an incredible amount of team, many much smarter than you in their different expertise, at the same time, you being on top of it enough to know everything that you need to know about your business in a depth. And if you're not doing that, yes, you are going to remain a 0 to 10. But if you really want to move from 10 to 100, and a lot of people can do that, and there's no such thing as you're born to be someone, or people feel, no, I only revel when I'm a startup. After 3 years, I get bored with my business. I think that unfortunately, I can't relate to that, because that's not necessarily true. It actually means that the probability of you making any mature business is going to be low, and it won't be a value proposition. So if you flit from business to business every 3 years, you're not really creating anything valuable. But I would say that in the 0 to 10 journey, by 4 or 5, whichever way you look at it, organization building and team building and a fair amount of empowerment, if it hasn't happened, yes, you're a restricted size individual is what I would say.
Right. And you currently wear multiple hats, and you are on the boards of many companies. And in your book, you've mentioned that multitasking is overrated, and focus can pay off big results. How do you currently balance your time, and how do you I mean, when do you decide to focus and when do you decide to zoom out?
Yeah. So firstly, I don't wear multiple hats, and I know it's a coinage, but I'm saying at a period of time, I'm wearing that hat. So I don't see myself as one of those, that's not the visual. The point is at that point in time, which could be a part of a day, part of a week, part of a month, you're wearing that single hat. Second, I have to say, other than on UpGrad, I'm not on any board of any investee company, because I think in India, it's a liability to be on the board of a company if you're not day-to-day involved in the first place. And there are no perquisites or pleasures to be there, whether you're on the board of a small company or in the board of Reliance or Tata. I think it still has the same sense of this thing, an onerousness. For me, I think at any given stage, it really means what's the outcome that I'm looking for and what gives you that pleasure. So I think the fun and the joy and the excitement. And I think I've been very blessed from the day one when I turned to be an entrepreneur. I converted a hobby into a business in many ways. I converted a passion into a business, and I was fortunate. I think I'm doing the same thing this time around in education too. So I think then you don't worry too much about that work-life balance concept, because there is a balance that has already come in there. Because if you're exhilarated, you're giving positive energy. If you're giving positive energy, even if I'm spending 3 hours on my what I would call life and family versus work, it's high quality time as far as I'm concerned, and anyone is constantly distracted. So I think for me, various things, the level of co-founders, the ability to build a team, where I think I can add value in a given day, where how do you want to go micro and macro? And maybe your last point, as you mentioned there about multitasking. So I think there are two aspects to this. You could, at any given stage in your life, be doing more than one thing. I mean, a lot of people have different pursuits. You have a hobby, you can have a sport, and then you also have your work and whatever else. So that is not multitasking. For me, the multitasking was that I think most of us use multitasking as a distraction. It's like 24 hours of the day or every waking hour, I want to do 5 things at that moment in time instead of really. So to me, that is where actually I think it's very regressive, because we all absolutely fully believe, yes, I'm here. Yes, I'm having the conversation, but I'm also trying to dispense with something else, finish a phone conversation, whatever else. I find it mind-boggling that you're having that, but 90% of the time we pick up calls that we don't even register in the number, and then you're having a long conversation as to why you don't want an insurance policy. And I'm thinking, how can it be so valuable in your time element? So to me, the multitasking is much more, how are we managing distractions in our life today? And I think we're managing them quite poorly.
And with Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, it just gets exaggerated.
No, it's either nicotine or it's not, right? I mean, they're good mediums if you selectively pick on them. But if you're hooked onto anything, it's a problem.
Absolutely. So there's one very important aspect of a skill set that the entrepreneur needs to develop, and you mentioned it in your book as well. First is communicating, right? One of the people you've spoken to says that communicating is more connecting, and the second is storytelling, right? Now, is there a process by way of which one can get better at this, whether it's communicating, whether it is storytelling? Was there any process, or you were a natural? How does one think about it?
I was definitely not a natural. I grew up in Grant Road in Mumbai, and I can tell you I went to a non-English medium school for the first part of almost the 7th standard. I can't say I had an insecurity complex, but I can't say I had any sense of level of confidence or whatever else. When I decided to be an entrepreneur, and when I finished my BCom and didn't go out for higher studies, I think personally, I'm a product of soft skills. I'm not a product of hard skills. So since I chose that I'm a product of soft skills, I had to work very hard to get them done. So if I'm talking to you without any preparation, and this is a very impromptu discussion where you're posing questions, it's not something I've thought through before and we're just having a conversation. It's happened over a period of time because I've really worked very hard on my own self-conviction and my own self-confidence. And I think as an entrepreneur, definitely self-conviction plays a very big role in what you want to necessarily do, right? Because at the end of the day, when you screwed up, you have only yourself to turn, and that can completely shatter you. Or you can say, all right, fine, let's keep moving. Let's do whatever you want to do. at that point in time, I thought this was best. So I think when it comes to communication, most people think that it's actually about auditory skills or being very fluent in a language or talking to 100 people or being able to have the confidence to stand on stage and give a TED talk. And it's not that. I mean, you can, but I think to connect is very, very important, because you can have the best idea, you can have the best thing, but people come and work with you because they want to get inspired. Few people will come if you're overpaying and you have some ESOPs that are valuable, but most people come because they want to be inspired and they want to learn. And for that, if you want to be a great leader, you need to do that. And lastly, as I said in my second chapter, all of us have our own stories. We all have our own stories. And I don't mean story means you make up a story. It's not a fictional thing. But we all have incredible experiences. But the attention span you'll get when you talk about an anecdote versus anything else, and you have a conversation and you ask me a specific question, I say, you know, about 8 years back, this has happened to me. Suddenly there's a whole different approach to what you want to do. And to me, therefore, I gave that example where, you know, this one candidate, this one person is taking an interview from two people, and he asks one of them, you know, saying, okay, so tell me what, in 5 minutes, what have you been doing? And all he does is rattles out his CV in a very articulate manner, saying, from here to here, I was in this, then I was in that, then I was in this, and these were my roles. And the other guy actually says, okay, so what have you been up to? And he says, you know, when I was 16, this happened to me. And my grandfather called me in the room, and it really deeply impacted me. And from that day onwards, this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to change, and I want to do that. I pursued this, it didn't work. I pursued that, it didn't work. Then finally, I got this one job. That's when I got my confidence. Then I did this. I can tell you, there's no question about which person the interviewer is going to hire, because he'll say, look, this guy seems less qualified than my first interview guy who rattled out the CV. But I need thinkers. I need people who are going to move forward in life. This guy can become a manager. He can become a leader. He's going to inspire people. And that's what makes the difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the businesses that you're invested in and founded, Ronnie, was U Sports, right? And you chose non-cricket sports, kabaddi, volleyball. Was that passion, or do you genuinely see an opportunity from an investing point of view in these non-cricket sports in India? What was your vision at that point in time?
I've never played a single sport, so I have to say it wasn't really a passion, and I have to be very frank about that. But cricket, I would be the 1001 person who would have something with it, and there's no value to be done, nothing to be disrupted. You can go out there and clap, you go to an auction, you do whatever you want to do. So it just didn't excite me. But when you take a sport like kabaddi and you feel, wow, if I can do something. So it was a combination of a sport hat on, an entrepreneurial hat on, an underdog hat on, because basically these are not celebrities. These are people who are, you know, our captain from our team was the assistant police commissioner in Gurgaon. The other person worked at, you know, a bank in the south of India. So when you look at that, and then you look at how to put it on a stage in a very different format and promote a sport, which all of us have some, it just sounded like one hell of a lot of fun and a lot of excitement. And I have to say, the excitement only tripled because the game is very exciting. But when I took it on, it was much more that, wow, it sounds like such an unusual idea. What an unusual challenge. Let's do it. But it was more completely as a passion. These kind of things turn out to be businesses, and that's great. But I think you can't go out there thinking I'm going to build a business.
Right. But do you see opportunities in these sports? I mean, do you see a future for them in India? And what kind
I think we're too a singular sport in this country, unfortunately. Fortunately and unfortunately, in cricket, you know, we all love, etc. But we haven't really, there is no other sport. And the whole world, including all the Commonwealth nations now, have moved from cricket. It's not the number one sport in England or Australia or New Zealand or West Indies or Africa or anyone else, but it's the number one sport in India by far. 80% of the viewership of anything in cricket you can't do without the India planning. So if you look at that, I think we're not a multi-sport nation, number one. The other part, I think, is that we don't look at it as a prestigious career option. It's a little bit like what entrepreneurship was 20 years back when I did that. Everyone said, oh, couldn't get a good job anywhere, huh? So you have to start working for yourself. today, if you ask all of us here, and I saw that somewhere where somebody actually mentioned it, where you say, okay, so from Olympics, what do you want? You said, I want 5 gold medals for our country. Okay, and what do you want from your son? Right? I wanted to do my MBA. So it's not like that. We did a football training camp and had a scholarship program to send 30 people to training in Germany for 2 years.
Yes.
Okay. I had to sit with each of those parents for a long period of time, more than the kid, just to understand, but so can he study there? Can he come back and do his MBA? And I'm saying, no, he wants to be a sport personality. Can he not pursue a career in sport? And they said, career in sport? How does that work? So if a country doesn't have the notion that you can have a career in sport, and that's a aspirational thing to do, then we have a long way to go in sport.
Right. Moving to your next, you started UpGrad, which is in the edtech space. And obviously, the space has got a lot of eyeballs of late over the last year or two. And
it's got a lot more funding than even eyeballs.
Absolutely.
Which I think is spoiling the sector right now, but yeah.
Right. And the pandemic has just accelerated, the adoption. So how do you see this space panning out, and specifically UpGrad? You have tie-ups with various.
No, I think I'd like to say it in 2 manners. All of us look at education as a calendared event. You go to school and then you go to college. It's a non-compromisable thing. It's as much as growing up is, as much as parenting is, as much as having kids is. It's almost in that sense an event. But today, I think the digital world has changed that around from a calendared event to something that is lifelong. And I think that's the fundamental change that's happened, number one. Number two, when you go to university or whatever else, it's a selective process. And the more it's selective, the more you go to it. Online is going to have to be able to make it much more democratic, but it's a much more eliminated process. When I apply to an ISB or an IIT, they get 10,000 applications, they'll select 100. Here, when we get 10,000 applications, we advise about 1,000 that go out, do coding, do this, do that. But 9,000 people, they're included. They get a choice to get a diploma degree college from a college they would never have dreamt to go. So, and most people can't take time off. After 10th and 12th, a lot of people started for socioeconomic reasons to start working. But now today, when we started our undergrad program, we found that most people will come from the 12th. 50% of the people that are coming into an undergrad program are working professionals because they never did their undergrad. And that's a huge revelation, but that is actually upgrading your entire learning process very much. So that's what I would say from an impact point of view. I think from a business goal point of view today, India is a massive market, China is a massive market, US is a massive market. I think in the last 30 days, regulations in China have gone topsy-turvy, and I don't think they're going to get reversed very easily when it comes to the edtech sector or the education sector. So really combinations of having 5 or 6 global edtech companies merging in the next 4 or 5 years are going to be big, consolidated growth ones. And I definitely, as far as I'm concerned, UpGrad has to be one of them. I mean, if I think that I exited the media business in a unicorn status long before it could be done, and if I don't have a 20x or 30x ambition of that, then I should be just investing or backing a kabaddi team.
Right, I'm sure you'll make it happen. So in the edtech sector, we see players in the K-12 space. We see players who are, in the entrance exam space, and then UpGrad, as I understand it, it's a lifelong learning thing even after you completed your graduation. Which spaces look the most attractive to you? I mean, does UpGrad have plans?
So we're in everything above K-12 as of now, yes, which is undergrad degrees, test prep, short courses, long courses, working professionals and degrees, and even PhDs. So we're a lifelong partner from 18 to 60. The good part about this sector is it's going to have repeat clientele. You do something in college and school, it's one-off, you get your graduate and that's done. Then you're an alumni. But here, we expect every 3 to 4 years, our customers to constantly come back to learn something new. So that's why we see this as a very interesting segment. The K-12 segment is larger because the augmented space there of ancillary learning has its own ARPU. Plus, it's the disposable income of parents. Here, you're getting your own salary and you're paying out of that. And there's a lot of FOMO and a lot of guilt. So I think FOMO and guilt have played a large role in getting the K-12 sector going. And COVID has helped. Actually, the higher education sector, which we are in, COVID has not necessarily helped. Because as much as people have got used to understanding what online is and respecting it, on the flip side, job insecurity has risen a lot.
Right. There's one question I have from one of our clients, which is on similar lines. He wants to know, what is the future of education? I mean, on one hand, physically attending a university is a very different experience, and you get to interact with people. I think that's very, very important when you're learning. However, I think going forward, online education is also becoming a reality. Would it be a combination of both, or do you think homeschooling or
yeah, I mean, I think blended versions may happen, but they don't need to happen for two reasons. Yes, you're absolutely right that going to a university and the networking and the faculty is a very, very cultural, but not all of us have that ability to do that, number one. And we do it at a particular age and stage. When you're working, very, very few people can take off and go back to a university. And today, if you think that your learning and education is stopped after you've graduated and threw that cap off, that's not the case. So I think blended versions can happen, but today everyone is looking online as a Zoom call and one lecturer and 25 people, 30 people. But actually, the learning experience in online is incredible. The tech platform allows peer-to-peer learning of study groups. It's taken anonymity out of online education. If you were a dropout in college, you would know, your friends would know. But in online, if you just didn't log on the next day, you would be a dropout. Not anymore, because the real learning experience comes from a tech platform. And on the first day, you got your study groups, you're interacting with people, albeit digitally. But if there are 5 people taken from Nasik or Nagpur versus 10 people getting in Delhi, they can always go out and do their offline. That's not something we do. But if you want to solve scalable problems for the 1 billion workforce around the world, I do believe that the future is to stay online, whereas there'll always be the offline that will give it that credibility, but at a certain period in your life, not always.
Right. Some of the other questions we have, Ronnie, is you've been investing in startups. You run a family office as well. What do you look at when people come to you with proposals or plans? What are the different aspects that you evaluate before you finally decide to cut a check?
So I don't wear too much of an investment hat on, because I think I'm my first generation entrepreneur bug, and so to me, I'd rather build ground upwards, and that's what excites me. But if I'm looking at certain investments of companies, it has to be something where I feel I can add a little bit of value. I understand it well. Mm-hmm. I'm not so excited in that first part because there's a lot of hoobery. Oh, this guy says this, and these sectors are hot. Then I call 3 people and they say it's hot and we move forward. But at the end of the day, you're investing in the entrepreneur and you're addressing in how large the market is. Because even if it's a rock star entrepreneur and things go sideways for 1 or 2 years, if it's a large market, you can survive in that process. I think from an entrepreneur, you look for really her or his ability to solve problems, to preempt problems. Second would be the vision, the articulated vision, and how practical they are. Third, some level of teamwork that will happen. Because if it's too early, then you're an angel investor. But then it's like potluck in any case. Then you're just taking a punt and you're moving forward and sort of spray and pray approach. But just the caliber of the team that the person has built would be there. And fourth, whether we like it or not, their ability to storytell is important. Because if they're not going to be able to raise whatever funds they need, then it'll be a constantly binary impact of how their business is going to run, unless it's a B2B business and it's already profitable, or it's in 1 year going to be profitable. But the only part there is, it won't be such a high growth business if it's already turning to be profitable and doesn't need too much funding. And therefore, your ability to unlock value may be limited.
Right. Which brings me to the next question that I've received. There is raging debate right now. And it's also coming of age of India's stock markets, where you've seen the listing of a large online player, Zomato. Now, there is a lot of debate on valuations, the fact that a lot of these companies are burning money to acquire customers. And there are a few more which are in line to list, right? Having seen many of these companies scale up yourself, what is your which side of the argument do you stand on? Are these companies sustainable? Will the capital keep flowing in?
Um, I mean, valuation is not an exercise that anyone can comment on or the other. What's the right value for that? Is a strong market share very, very good and a market positioning? Yes. Is the industry growing? Yes, it is. If the unit economics are poor, the chances of it ever being profitable is low. And if a business is not going to ever be profitable, that's a question mark for sure, whatever anyone says. Because then at every given stage, the music does stop. And right now, yes, the music is not just playing, it's blaring, right? I mean, so everyone's in it from that perspective. Of course, the music will slow down, but that doesn't mean it's a binary effect. But we need to be clear that a fundamental business will be good, at least on the gross margin. It's not about burning money. Because in the old state of your Tata Motors and your capital investment and some older generation companies, you did 1 lakh crores of capital expenditure and then it got depreciated over 10 years. So don't hold somebody who says whatever they spend in 1 year is going with the P&L. Actually, that means your balance sheet is a lot clearer. The good part is these companies don't have debt. Most of the companies that you otherwise look at, you have to figure about debt, then their servicing, and what their impact would be, where the debt can be such a one-time turnaround. So it's not got debt, it's got velocity. The growth mindset is very high. And therefore, profitability will be a process. So I think you need to gauge whether at a unit economic level, if I'm subsidizing my entire business to the consumer, then it's tricky. But if I'm growing the market and growing the business, but I'm spending money to build a brand, but even on that, I'm making a 5%, 10%, 15% margin, which I can take to 40%, then I think it's a business for the future. But today, I think the jury's out on some of these, whether the water will find its own level and where they'll be at their appropriate level from time to time. And yeah, I mean, just now is really not a gauge of anything else. And one has seen this enough with many companies, and then you need to be the long haul companies. It's not like even an Amazon or an Apple had it great. They went through enough troughs in the process, okay? And they didn't have dollops of money. I don't think the success of a Microsoft or an Amazon or an Apple has been how much money they raised in the first 5, 10 years of their existence. In fact, they raised much less than most people. If you see their IPO history, it was very modest. And then you see the largest thing of something and whatever else, those markets have actually corrected over a period of time. So if you're in the market short-term, medium-term, or long-term, you need to look at least a 3 or 5 year perspective on that stock. And if it's not looking good, then it's tough.
Are there any categories or sectors which are yet to be disrupted? I mean, we've seen.
Oh, yeah. I think the consumer mindset, the consumer pocket share, how we consume, what we do, that entire approach of how the consumption patterns are going to get consumed, are going to change radically over a period of time. So, I mean, whether it's fintech, or insurance tech or whatever else right now, and you're looking at basic things like transport and e-commerce and whatever else. Of course, there's tons of it that is going to actually get disrupted. I mean, you looked at it from the hotel industry, you look at it from most of these industries and you're seeing there's a fair amount of disruption that's still going to happen. Technologically wise, when you look at whether it's an automated car or whether it's a battery operated, so that's, and whether it's the two-wheeler or the four-wheeler in those markets. But I just think in service and consumer trends, it's going to get disruptions every year to create new business categories. No question about
it. Right. Moving on, Ronnie, I wanted to talk a little bit about your philanthropy initiatives, right? You started this foundation called Swades.
Yeah.
So what was the thought behind it? Because a lot of our clients who are entrepreneurs, right, all of them want to give back. but sometimes you're just not sure how you want to do it. Some people want to establish their own trusts, but others are very happy giving it to different trusts which are doing good work. What was your thought when you started it? And
So, I mean, firstly, I would say there's no such age or stage or bank balance that should trigger this. It's something that you need to do it. I think we started our foundation when we were in our early 20s, when we didn't have absolutely any money, didn't have any venture capital, nothing in that sense. But at that stage, we started by saying 10% of whatever we do or make profits will go back. It was a culture statement within the organization. The first office we rented was a 10,000 square foot office. And I put out 1,000 square foot for an orphanage and an old age home. And the first 30 people and then the 300 people who came there, they owned that 1,000 square feet more than they owned that. Nobody talked about a cabin in an office where 1,000 square feet had an old age home and a creche that they could go play with the kids in the lunchtime, stay in the evening and do whatever else. The cabin culture went away on day one. Was that the thought process? No. But what I'm saying is, did we have anything? No. It was just, that's what it came about. And he said, we've got a rental office. We're going to pay a rent. Let's do that. So I think serial wise, it moved forward and then one looked at various things. I think the crossroad for us was really in 2012 when we exited UTV to the Walt Disney Company. Obviously, for the first time in my life, I was not living on borrowed money and I had a bank balance of some sorts. And that's when one decided that in already our existing foundation, what do we want to do? I think we spend a lot of time and a lot of research. So I think for people who want to do it, I didn't want to cut a check. We didn't want to necessarily go out there and give it to somebody else. We wanted to be an execution foundation. We wanted to be responsible for outcomes ourselves and measure it ourselves. We wanted to bring our own team. I would not recommend it to everyone because it's a lot of work. Today, my wife spends 100% of her time on that. I spend at least 30% of my time on the foundation. So I wouldn't recommend it unless you're happy to make that compromise and sacrifice from day one. But I think there is no good time to do it. In an organization also, I would urge people that don't look at it just as a CSR or as a cutting thing. It establishes the culture of an organization when you think that way. And I think it's each one to their own. What you want to do, at what scale you want to do, and how privately you want to do it is important. I'm not a big follower of the people who've made these big pledges, or some of the Americans come in here and say, I want to make a big pledge. I've not been a fan of that because it's a private thing.
Right. Another interesting that I heard from your earlier interviews was that the foundation goes to a particular region and the whole idea is to alleviate them from poverty and then exit, right? Which I found interesting. I mean, the whole concept of exit. And what is the thought behind that?
So, when we did our year of research and we met with about 400 NGOs across India, we traveled everywhere, and Bangladesh, where there were some very inspirational models in Bangladesh, actually. Professor Faisal and Professor Yunus has won the Nobel Prize for his banking and his NBFCs, but Professor Faisal was even much more inspirational. One thing we found with a lot of the NGOs here is incredible amount of work, but you're doing the same thing for 15 to 20 years. We've talked to people who are managing these 3 schools. And we say, but how long have we been doing that? And I'm saying, they said for 30 years we've been doing that, which is great. But all I'm saying is, yes, but at some stage, isn't it something that you can actually leave and it can go somewhere and be on its own? Or do you really want to hold on to that? And that struck us as the best part of empowerment is that you can empower people, control their destiny and let them be. First, give them the infrastructure with water and sanitation. Then upgrade them through health facilities and education. But finally, and the holy grail is, how do you 4x or 5x their income? Now, when you go out there and tell people that building trust is not that easy. Telling people I'm going to take you from 40,000 rupees household income per year to 1 lakh rupees they don't understand that. They've not understood financial inclusion. They haven't understood what the power of that is, that I can be in control of my own destiny. But once that happens, they don't need you. So today, our biggest epicenter of how we work is we don't walk into a village without a village development committee. The village development committee has to have about 10 to 15 of them, depending on the size of the village. About a third have to be women, a third have to be young, and a third have to be males. Cross-section, they put out exactly what they want to do. We are a catalyst to them all the time to build their dream village, to build their aspiration. Wherever we help, we can help, and we do that. Wherever we can add, we will do that. Wherever we can need to set up a school or do whatever, we will do that. But without that village development committee, the first 2 years, we made lots of mistakes. We made our own targets and said, we want to build that many toilets, we want to do this. People were happy to say, okay, you want to build a toilet, you build a toilet. But they didn't have any skin in the game. And therefore, it took us some time to realize that unless they want it, there's no point you going out there and setting your targets to give it. So, yeah, I think the model has worked very well for us. A lot of naysayers, a lot of people told us, no, don't do a 360-degree approach, because focus on either education or focus on water. We do all. I think it's so connected when you're trying to empower that I can't think of any other way we would do it.
Wow. So is there a kind of a target that you want to go to so many villages, or how?
I think we set our own target. When we went out there, this was one of my most expensive retention statements I've made in my life, because my wife, when we moved out from media and entertainment, she did a 10-day course with Teach for India. And she came back one fine day on the dinner table and said, I'm joining Teach for India. So I said, no, wait a minute. We have this little foundation. She said, yeah, I understand that, and you're involved, and it's okay, but I want to go work for Teach for India. So I said, why don't we lift 1 million people out of poverty every 6 to 7 years? It was a vision statement made on a dining table. Till date, it's been the most expensive retention policy I've ever had in my life. So at that stage, did I have a very clear idea what that was? No. Then over the next 1 year, we said, okay, let's just do our homework. We don't know what we're talking about. We need to learn. We need to figure that out. And then we need to go forward. So I think size was just something. The first 3 years, meaning that everything was funded by us. And then we realized that we should be a catalyst. If I really want to grow this more, I should be able to attract donors and people. Now, if you're in the top 1 percentile, if you're a billionaire or whatever else, and you've got unlimited resources, then nobody's going to give a check to Mr. Azim Premji, because they feel, why should I give you a check? You've got enough check from your own. But actually, what we've created is something that can live well beyond us, because at every given stage, 50% we contribute, but 50% we're a catalyst, and we get donors, CSR companies, and whatever else. And the community contributes 15%. So over a period of time, we've created that model that can be self-sufficient and outlive anything.
Right. Amazing. Few more questions that I've got, Ronnie, is the last 1 year has been quite unusual, and all of us have had to adapt to a digital way of working. What are your lessons from the pandemic in terms of the way you you interact with people, or businesses? What are the learnings for some of?
I think the first 6 months for everyone was a lot of uncertainty. I think it was also about breaking a lot of habits, and you know how it is with all of us. If you have to break a habit, that's more debilitating than losing a job, if you ask me, or having a failure in life, because you're just obsessed with your habits, or you're comfortable with your habits. And I think that's what disrupted it the most. And then I think everyone found that this is going to be for the long haul. So let's find some good in this bad. And I'm not talking about the people who've had incredible health crisis, because that's a whole new ball game. But at least people who you've not felt that whose family in some form has not been hit with a permanent setback in terms of health. I think people have found a new order. I'm not a great fan to define this, because I think habit is such that it regresses quite easily. I mean, I think 4 months, 3 months back, as a country, we were having a massive catharsis of the health situation, right? Because it was not just about how fast the epidemic was. It showed up our health systems. It showed about desperation, but it also showed a lot of empathy. But in 3 months today, I think we've forgotten a fair part of that. So if I take just how freely we think today, because we feel, okay, nobody's stopping me, and then somebody's stopping me. If I look at that, I think 90% of it might go back to the normal. The 10% can be a differentiating factor, because that 10% can make a big difference. But I think I'm not sure we've learned long-term lessons today yet, if you ask me very bluntly. We've adapted. We've gone on with life. The jury's out whether everyone will have a life-changing moment for life. I know people have thought, yeah, it's good. I spend time off with the family. I've understood the importance of family. I've understood the importance of alone time. But I think with a vengeance, it can go back the other way.
Absolutely. The other question is a lot of the startups are replicating existing business models. I think it's also to do with your comment on it's become about fundraising, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Right? And a lot of money is flowing in from overseas VC funds. Uh, would we see more active investment and participation from Indian business houses and funds in going forward?
I think it's tough. We haven't had a generation where people have exited businesses and got what I would call liquid cash that you need to deploy. I mean, you all are in that business also, and wealth management is a different story. Either you've done a life saving or it's at a certain age in your life, and then there's that capital which needs, because what do you have to have? This is risk capital. It's not risk averse capital. It's not mutual fund capital. It's not 6% interest going to 3% interest going to 9% interest capital. It's not about 30% of my portfolio in the stock market capital. It's risk capital at scale. So I think we're quite some time away from really getting those to be sizable enough. But do we have a few large institutions that do take them? Yeah, there have been a few. But as much as like LIC is one of the largest investors in the stock market, you don't have that equivalent here in the private equity market, if you look at that perspective. Maybe a few are there again, but few and far between.
But nothing of significant size.
I think risk capital is not there to that extent. For a lot of people, it's like, okay, even if it's the Burman family or the Premji family or whatever, it's more like, let me try this a little bit here, take a liquidity and move that out. But it has to be a lot more than that and at scale. And I don't think people have had, billions of dollars worth of liquidity that can do that. Can that change and can there be funds? I think it's going to happen with these large companies or large funds that can have an India-centric fund. That's the closest we've got to here. But there are still people who are obviously global funds that have an India-focused fund over a period of time.
Right. And that brings me to the next question. What would be your advice to entrepreneurs, and specifically in two parts? One, I see that a lot of second generation, kids of old business entrepreneurs, right, do not want to get into the traditional family business. They want capital to start something new in the
Correct.
either in the technology space or something more exciting. And of course, there are a lot of hungry people now who are coming from tier 2 towns, right? And you said it in your book that you don't have to be big to dream big, and we're actually seeing that manifesting, right? And one of the people you mentioned in your book, Ritesh Agarwal, Oyo, is a prime example of that.
Yep.
What would be your advice to these two sets of people who are dreaming to become?
I think a second generation person who doesn't want to be in a family business should not be in the family business. I mean, I'm not saying you need to be mutinous. You don't need to be a rebel. You don't need to walk out. I think you need to find the solution with the people, find the solution within the family, because there is no guarantee that if you're not happy with it and if you're doing it, that you'll do a better job, or it'll be value accretive or value depletive, either with the person who's been the founder, which is your parent, or otherwise. And I think we need to accept that truth, because if you're not that involved, it's going to be value depletive while under supervision of someone who or founded the company, or their grandfather founded the company, or later on. That's the harsh truth, because then that's how the world is moved. So the second part is, and that's when you need to have that slight bit of detachment between how emotional you are about a family business. Because what is a family business? At the end of it, it's a business. Okay, of course, it's a business that my family built. Incredible sense of pride, not to give away with that. I think when I started, I was extremely attached to that. But at any given stage that I think that my daughter was going to be that, it was not in my thought and process. It was much more about the team members. So I would feel when you're at that crossroad, people need to have those frank discussions, because I don't think it's going to take it to the next level. It leads to a lot more frustration around the place. It can even lead to conflict. And for the person on the other side, the second generation, you don't need to suffer through this. You really don't need to suffer through it. Now, you got to count your chickens in that sense. Now, it may mean you need to start from scratch, because the person whose family business it is, whether it's your dad, mom, or whoever else, may not want to sell it to fund you and start your dream. So that's the cost and implication, that if you don't want the comfort level of it, then you need to be very uncomfortable to want to do with that. And actually, that I think will be the best way to start something on your own.
Right. The other question is, I mean, your book is about skills. And what we are observing today is, not today, I mean, it happens often when there is a disruption in the economy, is it creates a skills gap. I mean, we see on one side, a lot of businesses are under stress even today due to the lockdowns and the pandemic. And there are many unemployed people, right? But at the same time, we see this, bipolar nature where, let's say the tech industry or even my industry, right? Today, it's tough to recruit people because,
Yep.
there are not enough qualified people. There are not enough employable people. Let me put it that way. So, how should, let's say, the government or the tech sector, ed tech sector think about, how do we think about bridging this skills
Yeah, I
gap?
mean, I don't think the government should be thinking about that, because it's not something, I think at that basic level of skill development is perfectly fine, but at that level of employability, and therefore to me, I think the soft skills, actually the reason I was motivated to write this book, which took a lot of time personally, and books are not that gratifying. It's not like you make money on books. It's just that you do it out of your own love for that situation, was really that actually half the reason why you find some people are not employable is because of soft skills, because it's too either theoretical or whatever else. So I think people need to find how they're going to be a lot more round-ended. Otherwise, what happens is you hire a person, then within the first 3 months, you're sending them for a training program, you're doing this, and it's that first 6 months, and by the time you're not sure whether you're going to be able to retain them or not. So I think the workforce, and I focus therefore a lot on what I think are careers of tomorrow at UpGrad and what we do there. That's very important from one perspective. And I think the mixture of soft skills is another one.
Right. And lastly, Ronnie, I mean, how do you unwind? I mean, how do you kind of keep your...
I think, actually, when you shift your attention from one focus to another, which could be equally focused, you're unwinding, right? Because it's not like golf is a very high focus. You want to play squash or tennis, it's a very high focus, exhausting. But you're unwinding, because the only reason you're unwinding is you're moving from one focus area to another. So I think from moving from for-profit in education and UpGrad to a not-for-profit in Swadesh, to me, sometimes is an unwinding day. If you're going out there and spending time with the community, to us, it's very unwinding for both my wife and me, because actually it's a whole new world altogether. I think my storytelling ability, having done media, and for 5 years I had a non-compete, so I didn't do it. So my hobby is that I continue to want to tell stories. We just, so from time to time doing a movie completely as a passion project, though people think it's not a passion project because one does 5 or 10 of them a year. Normally that doesn't turn out to be a passion project. But that to me is also a section. So to me, it's not only about doing yoga, which I do, or going out to the movies, which I do, though for me it lands up being a little bit more work and onerous than anything else. I think is really about just moving your focus from one to the other. I find myself unwinding. Like I'm having this 1 hour conversation here. I did have a lot on my table before I came there, but right now I'm having a very free-flowing conversation, then I'll go back to it. So as far as I'm concerned, I've got positive energy from this 1 hour, and that's a good unwinding.
Great, that's great to hear, Ronnie. So, through our conversations, there are many concepts in the book that I've been able to really connect to. One of the things you say is 2 things, actually, from an education point of view: future-proofing oneself, where one has to constantly keep upgrading. And second thing you say, stability is a myth.
Yeah.
I've also heard someone else say that, salary is an opium, right? You get used to it. So what are your thoughts on it? I mean, how can...
I think the reason I put stability is a slippery slope is really because today I think people feel, why does everyone have to be ambitious? Why do I have to be so ambitious? I don't need to be so ambitious. And I think in your prime and your working career, from 20s to the 40s to the 50s, I don't think there's today an option that you can say, look, I'm fine. I'm okay with a normal increment. I'm okay flying under the radar. I don't want to necessarily be the guy that stands out or the person that stands out. Today, I don't think the 21st century, you can get security by being comfortable and complacent and saying, I'm like a steady life. There is no such thing. Yes, of course, government employment does offer you that. But if you don't take that in any country in the world with government employment, I don't think there's any, what I would call that kind of stability left. And people feel that I like a stable life. I think it's going to be a lot more unstable if you like a stable life.
Right. Interesting. I mean, I didn't realize we've already...
I think we're on the hour, I think, right?
Yeah, we've already completed an hour. But
Yeah.
I'll just squeeze in one more question from one of our clients, and I'm getting lots of these questions on my WhatsApp as well. I mean, what according to you could be the careers of tomorrow? I mean, I think when you started off, probably being an engineer or a doctor was...
So I would say the categories have moved quite a lot, and it's not about whether now you're an engineer or a doctor, it's about what you do with that. It's about, even if you're a lawyer, but law firms are going to hire data analytics people in there because of the simple reason that it's not just about reading a case law, it's not about running it. It's about how you interpret so many elements of that. So I think there's an entire new element that's coming that's disruptive. Like digital marketing is now almost a must for everyone. So you can't have marketing without the context of digital marketing. So I think the future is really, today when some of our best-selling programs are not an MBA, most people thought about you're doing an MBA in HR, you're doing an MBA in marketing. The people who are coming to us are doing an MBA in business analytics or data analytics and an MBA in that. So if you look at it, it's that cross-grade. It's not like suddenly you'll find a new category to a doctorate or whatever else, but it's the hybrid of what we're doing there. And most of the courses that we're doing online are actually not courses that the universities who we tie up are doing it in their real world. Because we have done the research, we have come back and said, here are the careers of tomorrow, and we'll do this as a hybrid. And that's where it's gone to the next level.
Right. Fantastic. I think, we've crossed the hour,
Yeah.
but I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, no, so have I. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I know. And a lot of people are asking me, this is the book in case you haven't seen, Skill It, Kill It. I have read it. It's an amazing book. So I've got my copy. So I would urge all of you to get...
Ashish, I request you to switch off your video filter so that the book can be visible.
Oh, I see. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I'll do it from here. This is a better way.
Okay. Yeah, that's simpler.
All right.
But really,
thank you so much.
Thank you, Ronnie. It's been a pleasure. I wanted to thank all our clients who've logged. There are many of them watching it on our YouTube stream as well. Thank you for joining us on a Friday evening. It's been a really amazing conversation, and Ronnie, really pleasure to have you on our show.
Lovely.
And thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.